Hello, my name is Jason Peck, and this is a comedy Q&A interview with actor, writer, director, and solo performer Tim Mooney. Tim tours the United States performing various one-man shows, the first of which was Molière Than Thou, and we're going to be talking about French dramatist Molière in this interview. I will offer apologies right off the bat. Unfortunately, some of the times the audio and the video wasn't that great, so you're definitely going to want to check out the transcript of this interview. And also, Tim has a few books available too. Please check those out. And also, if you're interested in hiring Tim, please check out his website. Thanks.
Hello. How are you, sir?
I'm good now.
Ha. Oh, there we go. Wonderful. Everything seems to be working fine.
Now it does. I had to reboot, and I think it reloaded the software, and I had to tell it my age for some reason.
Strange. Social security number as well, that sort of thing.
Strangely, it did not want that.
Okay, phew.
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't mind, we'll just jump straight into this. Is that all right?
No problem.
Okay. Could you just tell me a little bit about your background as a writer and a performer, and what led you to Molière?
Sure. I've been acting since high school. I continued in college, got my bachelor's in acting and directing, went on to apprentice or intern at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, got my Master of Fine Arts in directing out of the University of Nebraska, continued to intern on a directing literary the Milwaukee rep and the Seattle rep, and taught for a couple of years. I taught stage movement for a while at Northern Illinois University.
Nice. Okay. And so from that background, how did you end up heading towards Molière?
Yeah, there was a brief interim in which I was doing just odd jobs as director, actor, and I landed as director at the Stage 2 Theater Company in Waukegan, Illinois.
Okay.
And we did mostly original work. And from that, we discovered that the an audience out, we decided to do something with a title that people would recognize. So we landed on Tartuffe. I was familiar with Tartuffe from working on it at the Seattle Repertory Theater.
Got it.
And I was very curious about the process of writing at that time, and especially I remembered the translation, which was in rhyme. Doing my own rhymed translation of Tartuffe, and it came out far better than I imagined it would, and I quit running the theater company and started writing new variations of the plays of Molière in rhymed iambic pentameter.
Oh, nice. Okay. So now I've got Molière's period of his main period of work started at 1645, right?
Maybe a few years earlier than that.
Okay.
I think it was around 41, 42 that he had a failed attempt opening a theater in Paris. He told his father that he no longer had an interest in being upholsterer to the king, left that job, which had been purchased for him by his father, and began acting with an actress that he had fallen in love with. He traded in his inheritance from his mother to open their own theater company. They failed miserably.
Oh, I'm losing you slightly there.
Okay. Well, he got thrown into debtor's prison, and and his father bailed him out, probably saying, "I told you so." And eventually, probably one step ahead of the creditors, he and his company took off into the wilds of opposed to in their own theatrical space.
Right. Okay. Sorry, so just that last piece again. They didn't have their own theatrical space, or they did. I sort of missed that.
They did.
Got it.
He blew his inheritance on a theater space, and he actually dreamed of being a great heroic, dramatic actor,
Right.
and saw himself as a great tragedian rather than a comic player.
Right.
And people didn't buy him as a great tragedian. As it, he was too short in the torso to actually sell as a hero.
Okay. And that seems like a pattern I've noticed with other comic actors. There was a comic actor in England back in the sort of mid 20th century, Kenneth Williams. He saw himself as a great Shakespearean actor, but he was sort of stuck with this voice, this wonderful, this sort of I'm not very good impressionist, but that
Right.
just this really stuck nasally voice, but a brilliant comic actor. And so you have to go with what you've got, right?
Yeah, and given Moliere's criteria as someone who was sincere and heroic in pursuing a great virtuous objective.
Right. Okay. So this is probably then 1641-ish, where
Yes.
More than 20 plus years after the death of Shakespeare.
Right. He was born about 6 years after Shakespeare.
Got it. Okay. And the King of England at the time was Charles I. And in France, it was Louis XIV. Is that right?
It was Louis the 13th transitioning into Louis the 14th.
Got it. Okay.
His father was the upholsterer to Louis the 13th.
Got it.
And Moliere would have inherited that job with Louis.
Okay. So for people discovering Moliere for the first time, would you say there were any modern comedies or comedians that you could sort of roughly compare to his work?
I would, what I often tell people is that you cannot watch a half an hour of situation comedy on television today without Moliere's fingerprints being all over it.
Right.
I would say the most brazen example that I've seen has been on Saturday Night Live.
Okay.
And Steve Martin especially, where there was a scene just ripped off from Moliere that's hysterical, in which Steve Martin was playing he was doing a drug test on Tom Hanks to see if Tom Hanks, I think, was actually eligible to perform the of Saturday Night Live for 15 years. So that they did a urine test. They bring out the urine sample, and they're about to put it through some wacky machinery to examine it, and Steve Martin just drinks it instead, right out of Moliere.
Okay. Okay, great. Now, from what I've been reading, his plays were influenced by the Italian theatrical movement Commedia dell'arte. Was this a typical thing for playwrights of his era to be influenced by this movement? Oh, got a poor connection.
So
again.
it wasn't stuff that was written out and rehearsed. They would work from scenarios, and it was more of something that you would do on the road when you were performing outdoors in a wide open courtyard or tennis court or whatever they might perform in. It was designed to get the attention of the audience, to hold that attention as long as they possibly could, so that the audience would still be around when it came time to pass the hat at the end.
Got it.
Whereas a playwright might write out an elaborate script to be performed indoors, which how Moliere started out. but when they went on the road, he learned a ton about the whole commedia impulse.
Okay. And so with that in mind, are there any archetypes that he either borrowed from the comedian movement or that he came up with himself?
Yeah, certainly. I think the obvious one is probably Dottore, or the doctor. I think it was safe for him more than anything to make fun of doctors. And so he would squeeze them in. I think there's at least 5 plays that I can think of off of the top of my head in which he will include a doctor, such as the Doctor in Spite of Himself, the Imaginary Invalid, the Flying Doctor. There's a doctor who shows up in Don Juan and several other plays.
Got it. Okay.
And of course, the doctor is an idiot. I have no idea about what disease might be or how you might actually cure it.
Right.
Famously, they figured out that blood actually circulates in, I think, 1623.
Wow.
And the doctors in the 1670s still hadn't 100% bought into that, and Molière would mock that relentlessly.
Got it. Interesting. So you were saying that he essentially mocked the doctors as being idiots, and it's interesting that you say that even though they figure that out, the doctors essentially men of science, not still buying into that, that scientific evidence. It's interesting. Sorry, say that again?
I said you froze up on me there for a moment, and I didn't hear if there was actually a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying that it was interesting to me that he mocks doctors as being idiots, and they didn't seem convinced that blood circulated, even though they're men of science.
Right. They essentially they had I think 3 main methods of doctoring, which would be injections.
Right.
And you will see the word injections in Molière quite often. They're not the injections that we know of. They're not intravenous injections. Okay. That's usually the nice word for enemas.
Okay.
And bad.
No, I didn't get that last one. You froze up on me a little bit there.
Okay, so what I said was they had 3 basic methods of healing, which would have been purgings, that is to vomit something up,
right?
Bleedings, to cut open a vein and let all the bad humors escape, and injections, which were essentially enemas.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
And do you think actors today need to have a certain skill set to perform his plays?
Any actor needs a good physicality, a good pliable body in which they can, because sometimes there's whereas what we receive from Molière is the words and the language that he originally used.
Yeah.
What we know is that these were broad physical comedies. And someone needs to be able to go very fully into whatever acrobatics or tumbling or sword fighting or just general mischief those characters would have been up to.
Oh wow! Okay.
However,
mm-hmm.
The style, the have gone their entire career only playing a single character throughout. So I might specialize as a commedia performer as the dottore.
Yeah.
And I might play that through my entire career in different scenarios. And I think you'll see that in a lot of Molière plays. There's always the parental characters, the young lovers, the doctors, the lawyers, the priests. And quite often, if you can nail that one character, you can play that one character for quite a long time through the course of your career.
Right, and that was the same with Molière.
Yes, and right. I believe he played himself the mischievous servant a lot.
Got it.
Actually, he played a variety of characters, but mostly he wrote for himself the most challenging comic roles, and so he would have had to play quite a different set of characters himself.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned actors should have a pliable body, good physicality, and because they were essentially broad physical comedies.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now, I think this sort of ties back to what we were talking about at the beginning. He was part of a theatrical troupe. And how did they make their money? Was it just through box office receipts, or did they have some sort of patronage?
Well, you kind of have to look at three phases. There was the first when they were trying to run their own theater. They were reliant on box office receipts, which did not work out for them. Then they went on the road for about 13 years.
Wow.
And so at that point, for a long time, they would be performing outdoors, and they would be reliant on passing the hat at the end of the show. Then they came back to Paris. They kind of did an audition performance for the king and his brother.
Right.
And actually, there was a brief period while they were still on the road. They had a patron who was Prince Conti. And apparently Prince Conti got religion at some point and decided theater was bad and withdrew his patronage from Molière's troupe, which Molière's troupe resented.
Right.
And rumor has it that he might have based the character of Tartuffe on Prince Conti.
Ah, okay.
But October 24th, 1658, he performed for the king and the king's brother. And they tried to haul their serious play again. I believe it was one of the works of QnA that they wanted to present, thinking that this was their big chance to make it as the great heroic tragedians that they always wanted to be.
Right.
It bombed miserably. And they said, Molière, knowing the king and how to behave in court from his upbringing, came out before the curtain and said, "We've got another show we would like to perform for you, God bless your majesty. And if you like, it's this little divertissement." And so they say, "Sure, fine, go ahead and perform it." And I believe it was either The Love Doctor or Love's the Best Doctor that they formed, probably a minute little piece that went over extremely well. As the king's brother was at that time known as Monsieur, and they became the Troupe de Monsieur, which was to say the troupe performing at the patronage of the king's brother.
Got it.
And there was a period of several years there that they would perform at the king's brother's castle in repertory with another was Scaramouche, whom we all recall from the song by Queen, Scaramouche, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango?
Right.
Who was actually I believe the name was Tiberio Fiorelli or something to that effect. He was great commedia troupe, and they would perform alternate nights with that troupe for a while. Eventually, they came under the patronage of the king himself, and so they became the Troupe du Roi for essentially the remainder of Molière's life.
Right. Okay. And if someone wanted an introduction to Molière's work, would there be maybe one play or a couple of plays that you would suggest sort of really encapsulates, his, I guess, his whole body of work, really? Is there, maybe one or two? Because I know he wrote a vast amount.
Yeah, I think he wrote about 30, 32 plays. Some of them just very short, one acts, half hour, 20-minute scripts. But there was a period of time, essentially from 1662 to 1673, when he died, that he wrote some of the great classic comedies of French theater. And in the center of that period, there were three, I would say, that I would isolate, where he was really at the height of his powers. And that would include Tartuffe, The Misanthrope, and Don Juan. Don Juan doesn't get a lot of play these days, at least in America, I think because it's got a huge cast and 5 different sets. But I think that if you were looking for two to bring out Moliere's life and his vision, I would look at Tartuffe and The Misanthrope.
Got it. Okay. Great. Now, you perform a number of different one-man shows, as that's your main thing. But one of the early ones at least, was Molière Than Thou. Could you just briefly tell me a little bit about the show and how it came to be?
Okay, so I had which I directed back in, that would have been 1997.
Okay.
I quit running the theater company, started writing new versions of the plays of Molière, and I wrote about 12 different adaptations in the course of about 4 years. And I directed The Miser, and then I started auditioning for those plays myself rather than doing all the production work on them. I wanted to kind of embody the performance as. So I am cast as a lot of the roles that Molière himself originally portrayed in Scapin, in The Misanthrope, in The Doctor in Spite of Himself, and Sganarelle, or The Imaginary Cuckold. And so I had built up this repertory in which I was playing the role Molière himself originally played.
Got it.
And I would go circuit to promote those plays as they were coming up. So I would talk to the Eagles and the Rotary Club and I've forgotten all those clubs that are out there. But on one occasion, I was brought to address, at least I thought it was to address the Canadian Women's Guild.
Okay.
And I was going to talk about Molière, which was usually my thing, but they didn't want a lecture. They wanted a performance. And since they were actually paying me to make the appearance, I had to come up with something. So knowing that Molière had this company of 15, 17 actors working with him at all times, I had to come up with a reason that might leave Molière performing by himself and how he would handle that. And so sometimes creating an event or a one-person show is just asking the right questions. And so I had to ask, why would Molière be performing alone? Well, what if his ensemble all got sick with something and he couldn't rely on them to perform, but they had already sold out the house? He wouldn't have wanted to refund that money, so he would do whatever it was he could do to collect that box office money without having to refund it.
Right.
And so he comes up with the notion, having memorized all these plays and having had to keep them in his head because you never know when the king is going to ask for School for Wives again. He hauls out his favorite monologues, introduces each one, and leads the audience through kind of an overview of his career and performances.
Got it. Nice. Okay. And you've basically been performing that ever since, performing it that way, right?
Yeah, I first performed it in March of 2000.
Okay.
And I have probably performed it well over 500 times since then.
Wow. And then obviously, I mean, I don't want to expand too much into the other areas, but you've gone into other one-person shows. You've got some Shakespeare in there.
Yes.
There was Breakneck Julius Caesar, right? It's where you perform.
Yes. Well, just to give you a quick
just
overview,
briefly.
Amongst I'm up over 10 one-man plays at this point.
Right.
But just to stay within our realm here, I did one called Lot O Shakespeare, in which I do one monologue from every Shakespeare play, determined entirely at random by the spin of a bingo cage.
Right.
From that one, I realized that the history plays make better sense when you do them in chronological order. And so I created a new one-man show called Shakespeare's Histories, 10 Epic Plays at a Breakneck Pace, in which I do all 10 history plays in order in the course of a single. I got the idea from a.
Sorry, you froze up. Sorry, you froze up briefly there. We got to the breakneck pace where you perform all of the history plays in one evening. Is that right?
Correct.
Perfect.
Okay. So from there, an adjudicator from Denmark saw me do Shakespeare's Histories and really wanted me to focus on just one play. And I said, well, what play do you think I ought to do? And he said, well, I'm from Denmark, suggesting that he thought I should be doing Hamlet.
Yeah.
So I'd always, had a special fascination with Hamlet. And when somebody from Denmark says you really ought to do Hamlet, I think that's justification enough.
Yeah.
And so I created Breakneck Hamlet, in which I do all of Hamlet in a single hour. And from there, one of my most popular monologues has always been Mark Antony's Friends, Romans, Countrymen.
Okay.
And so I wanted to see how that monologue, that speech, comes out in the course of that play, and how the fallout from that speech plays out through the rest of that play. So I created Breakneck Julius Caesar.
Got it.
So those have been kind of my most popular one-man shows over the years, have been those 4 Shakespeare one-man shows and the one Molière show.
Got it. Okay. I wanted to ask you next, have you directed any Molière plays since you've been performing the one-man play version of it?
Yes.
Yes.
I think I keep getting called back to do Tartuffe again. I've performed that. I've directed that 2 more times. And I've also directed The Misanthrope one further time. So, yes, I come back to that well every now and again. Got it.
Because the reason why I was asking was I'm interested to know, having performed as Molière and done, some of the significant speeches, if your experience doing that has now affected how you see the plays and altered your directing of them.
I'm in the intervening years, and especially having observed a lot of companies attempting to perform
hang on.
Come to understand. Watching other companies perform my scripts has informed me a lot about how much stylized performance actors need to understand in order to be fully present for the audience, to handle the language, to handle the physicality. And so as I come back to directing again, I'm a lot more secure in what I want to see. So rather than kind of feeling our way through it emotionally, I have a lot of blocking that I know that I want people to execute in the course of the performance.
Right.
I have a knowledge of the rhythm of the iambic pentameter that informs the delivery. And so I guess over the years I've gotten a lot more technical as opposed to internal.
Okay, got it. And just briefly, this wasn't a question that I sent you, it's just coming to me now. I've seen some of Moliere's plays when they've been translated in verse, and sometimes I see them as prose. Now,
yes,
do you think does it work better if it's in verse? Do you think?
Well, here's the thing. Molière wrote half of the time in verse and half of the time in prose.
Ah, okay.
I don't think we actually know why. My best guess is that Molière wrote in prose when he was writing under a deadline. When he knew that the king needed this performance on Thursday, he wrote in prose just to crank it out and get it down on paper. But when he had the time to really think about it and develop it, I think that was when he wrote in verse. What I do is I take, whether he wrote in prose or verse, I write in verse because it feels like Molière to me more than the prose does. It elevates the speech, and it gives you the feeling of the kind of the God figure of the playwright manipulating the characters in such a way that you're very conscious of the influence of the playwright, and you know that the playwright has an intent to take you somewhere.
Okay.
If only because you're waiting to hear the rhyme that comes at the end of the second line of each couplet. And so there's a way that you pay somewhat better attention when the line is in verse than when it is prose.
Got it. Okay. And then you can also undercut the audience and deny them that, in theory, right? You could deny them the rhyme that they think they're going to have.
Yes. I did The Bourgeois Gentleman. The Bourgeois Gentleman is famous for several lines, but one in particular is the character of Monsieur Jourdain isn't very intelligent.
Okay.
And he is asking the philosophy master to help him understand how to write this note to this woman that he wants to write to. And he's asking if it should be in prose or in verse. Or, no, I'm sorry. The philosophy master asks him if he wants it written in prose or in verse.
Okay.
The bourgeois gentleman does not understand the difference between the two. And he says, well, the way that I speak now, what is that? Well, that's definitely prose. The bourgeois gentleman is thrilled to understand that he's been speaking in prose all his life and didn't even know it. So in writing my adaptation of The Bourgeois Gentleman, I wrote everything in verse except for Monsieur Jourdain, who cannot rhyme if his life depended on it.
Got it.
And so the word glove or of or above comes up. The audience knows that the rhyme they are waiting for is love, but Monsieur Jourdain comes up with affection. And
right.
And so it's a running joke through the course of that particular translation of The Bourgeois Gentleman, is that I'm setting you up for a rhyme and then denying you that rhyme.
Got it.
Or quite often I set you up for a rhyme in my other adaptations and provide you with a rhyme that you're not expecting because I've combined a series of words that don't usually read as a single word. For instance, let me just give you an example. In The Misanthrope, which is the first speech that I do in Molière from now, I have the honor with which you endear me thusly is one which I would take quite seriously.
Okay.
So I try to elevate the rhyme itself above kind of the pedestrian rhymes that we hear all the time.
Right. Got it. Like it. Just a couple more, Tim. Knowing what you know about Molière, are there and your experiences, up until now, are there any lessons that you feel modern comedy or modern comedians could learn from his work, or do you feel those lessons have all been learned?
Oh, I think modern comedians act.
Oh, hang on, it froze up.
Okay, you now.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
Now you froze. Oh, there you go. Okay. So I think modern comedians need to learn about presence and need to learn about articulation.
Okay.
And it's what we've lost in the interim. Since the 1950s, actors have grown up valuing internal work and this Marlon Brando school of muttering and mumbling their way through the speech. And we have this notion that realistic performance demands that we never acknowledge or look out at the audience. And what the audience is dying for is to see the eyes of the performer and to look into those eyes and understand the emotional life that's going on behind them.
Got it. Okay, that's really interesting. That's a very, if you don't mind me saying, that's a very English outlook that you have there.
Yeah, I understand that. But the fact is that the most nuanced, detailed, informative muscles in our bodies are those muscles that surround the mouth and the eye. Right. And every aspect of the story can be told in what's happening in those muscles. Yeah. And the American actor likes to shut out the audience and deny them that access. Right. And you can just see the audience lighting up when they get included in the world of the performer, as opposed to when they get shut out. So yes, I think I've written a book, by the way, on this topic.
Okay.
Called Acting at the Speed of Life, Conquering Theatrical Style.
Okay.
And in which I go into this at some depth. Hopefully, if only to create a generation of actors who are capable of interpreting the
froze up again.
So that, because often I have jokes not only able to form the words that I've written to the works of Molière, so that the audience can get not only the jokes that are resting on the surface in the physical interaction, but also those subsurface jokes that are the innuendo and the double entendre in which they can enjoy the play on several levels.
Got it. Acting at the speed of life.
That's correct.
And where can we learn more about you, Tim? What's your website?
My website is timmooneyrep.com.
timmooneyrep.com. Mm-hmm.
My ongoing joke is that I perform as the Timothy Mooney Repertory Theater, which is accurate in that I, Timothy Mooney, am performing a repertory of plays,
right, all
featuring Timothy Mooney, the one-man show. So and the shortened access to that on the web is timmooneyrep.com.
Got it. And if anyone wants to pick up your copy of your book, that's the best place to join in if you know the words. That's the best place to do it as well.
Yeah, you can do it there. You can find it on Amazon or probably any place that I've seen it on Barnes and Noble as well.
Right,
so
nice.
So I don't want to just automatically send everyone over to Amazon because they've got enough money and they've wasted enough cardboard already.
Right.
But if they want to come by my website and pick up a copy, so much the better.
Great. Okay. Always better get it directly from the source. And so we can learn more.
That also enables.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I can also sign it as well when they buy it that way.
Perfect. Okay. Tim Mooney Rep. to learn more about you and to hire you as well, to bring you in, because you tour around schools, right?
That's correct.
And colleges.
I lay out a course every semester that will bring me potentially to all 48 contiguous states in the U.S.
Nice.
And quite often I cross over into Canada as well. So hiring me is a matter of finding the date that I'm going to be in your neighborhood and booking me to do a show.
Nice. Tim Mooney Rep. We can find out more about your show there and hopefully hire you, and also your book, Acting at the Speed of Life.
That would be awesome.
Wonderful. Tim, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jason.
I'm glad we were able to do this.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
Sure.
With all of this.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
I said thanks for me. And good luck.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Thanks.
Yes.
All right. Speak soon. See you.
Take care.
You too.